I never thought my life would come to this point, standing in a courtroom, my heart pounding so loudly that I could almost hear it echo against the walls, waiting for a judge to decide if I was worthy enough to keep my own son. The air inside was heavy, filled with silence that carried the weight of everyone's judgment. My hands trembled as I held the stack of documents my lawyer had asked me to bring. They were nothing more than papers, but to me, they felt like the very threads holding my future together. Every father dreams of giving his child the best life possible. From the moment my son was born, I swore that no matter how broken my marriage became, he would never feel abandoned. I had played with him, helped him with school projects, tucked him into bed when nightmares shook him awake, and taught him how to ride his bike even when my own exhaustion pressed down on me like an anchor. But now, it felt like all of those years of love, sacrifice, and late nights were being questioned. My wife and I were no longer partners. We were enemies, facing each other in the harshest battle of all. Who deserved custody of our boy? The morning had started with a chill. I arrived at the courthouse early, hoping to gather my thoughts. My lawyer, a calm man with a steady voice, kept reassuring me that we had strong evidence of my commitment as a father. He said my financial stability, clean record, and constant presence in my son's life worked in my favor. But deep inside, I carried a fear that no amount of preparation could erase. The truth was simple. Courts often lean toward mothers in custody cases, and I knew the odds were stacked against me. When my wife walked in with her attorney, I felt a mixture of sadness and anger. Once upon a time, we had built dreams together, shared laughter over silly things, and promised each other forever. Now, her eyes were cold, sharp, and filled with determination. She was no longer my partner. She was someone prepared to paint me as a villain. I wanted to hate her, but a small part of me still remembered the woman I fell in love with, and that made the situation hurt even more. As the proceedings began, I tried to focus on the judge's voice, though every word felt like it floated through a fog. My lawyer presented my case, highlighting how I had always been present, never missed important school meetings, provided financial stability, and cared for my son even when my wife's work kept her away. He spoke with clarity, reminding the court that the child's best interest should be the only priority. Then it was her lawyer's turn. He stood tall, with an almost smug confidence, as though he had been waiting for this moment. He began with calm statements about my wife's nurturing nature, her role as a mother, and how she had been the one to carry and raise our child through his earliest years. That much was true. I never denied her importance. But then his words took a sharp turn. He claimed I was emotionally unavailable, that I spent too much time focused on work and not enough on my son. He twisted my sacrifices into weapons against me. The long hours I had worked to pay the bills, to keep a roof over our heads, were now being used as proof that I didn't care. I clenched my fists under the table, trying to keep my composure as he painted a picture of me that felt like a stranger. And then came the moment that shook me to my core. Her lawyer leaned forward, looked directly at the judge, and said something I never expected, that I had once confessed to my wife that I wasn't sure I was ready for fatherhood when our son was born. My chest tightened as the words pierced through me. He had taken a private conversation, one born out of youthful fear and uncertainty, and turned it into a weapon against me. Yes, I had been scared back then. What man isn't terrified the first time he becomes a father? I remembered holding my newborn son in my arms, trembling, afraid I would drop him, afraid I wouldn't live up to the responsibility. But that fear had only made me love him more fiercely, had pushed me to grow into the father he deserved. That private admission of vulnerability was now being twisted into proof that I was unfit. The courtroom fell into a hush. I could feel eyes on me, judging, wondering if I was truly the man they were describing. My lawyer stood quickly, objecting, his voice steady but firm, saying that a moment of youthful fear did not erase years of proven dedication. Still, the damage was done. The judge scribbled notes, and I felt as if a crack had opened beneath me. I glanced at my son, who was too young to understand fully but old enough to sense that something important was happening. He sat outside the courtroom with my sister, waiting for this nightmare to end. All I could think about was how unfair it was that his future depended on words twisted in the courtroom, rather than the love he felt every day when he was with me. My wife avoided my gaze. Maybe she felt justified. Maybe she thought this was her way of winning, of securing her place as the better parent. But to me, it wasn't about winning or losing. It was about not being separated from the boy who meant everything to me. As the session ended for the day, the judge announced that the final decision would be made after reviewing all testimonies and documents. I walked out with my heart heavy, each step echoing like thunder in my ears. My lawyer placed a hand on my shoulder, telling me not to lose hope, that we still had a chance. But hope felt fragile. That night, I couldn't sleep. I sat by my son's empty bed, running my fingers over his blanket, remembering the nights I had tucked him in and read him stories. The thought of losing those moments, of becoming a visitor in his life, was unbearable. I whispered promises to the silent room that no matter what happened, I would never stop fighting for him. This was only the beginning, and I knew the road ahead would test me in ways I never imagined. But if the court needed proof of my love, then I would give him everything, because nothing in this world mattered more to me than being a father to my son. ChatGPT said, the day of the final hearing arrived sooner than I expected. The past week had been a blur of restless nights and endless rehearsals with my lawyer. I had gone over every detail of my life, every interaction with my son, every proof of my involvement as a father. Still, nothing could prepare me for the heaviness in my chest as I walked into the courtroom again. The wooden benches were filled with quiet spectators, and the smell of polished floors mixed with the faint scent of paper and ink. I glanced around and saw my wife sitting across from me, her lawyer whispering something in her ear. She looked composed, almost victorious, as if she had already claimed the outcome. My hands trembled slightly, but I forced myself to breathe deeply, reminding myself why I was here. This wasn't about pride. This wasn't about revenge. It was about my son, about the little boy who had run into my arms countless times and called me his hero. The judge entered, and the courtroom rose to its feet. My pulse raced, and I could feel sweat trickling down the back of my neck. When the session began, my lawyer made his final arguments. He spoke with calm authority, presenting evidence of my involvement. School records where my signature appeared on forms, receipts from the extracurricular activities I paid for, photographs of family trips, and testimonies from neighbors who had witnessed me walking my son to school. He reminded the court that parenting wasn't about perfection, but about consistent love and presence. His words gave me a glimmer of hope. But then my wife's lawyer rose, and the air shifted again. He repeated the claim that I had once admitted I wasn't ready for fatherhood. He described me as a man who put work above family, a man who lacked emotional depth to nurture a growing child. He spoke as though my career was a betrayal instead of a sacrifice. Each word felt like a knife, cutting into the image I had tried so hard to preserve. Finally, the judge asked me to take the stand. My legs felt heavy as I walked forward, but I straightened my back, determined not to appear weak. I raised my hand and swore to tell the truth. Then I looked directly at the judge, and for the first time in this entire ordeal, I let go of rehearsed lines. I spoke from my heart. I admitted that when my son was born, I had been terrified. I confessed that I once whispered to my wife that I didn't know if I was ready for the responsibility. But I explained what that fear had done. It had forced me to grow. It had driven me to work harder, to love more fiercely, to make sure my son never felt the weight of my doubts. I described the nights I stayed up with him when he was sick, the mornings I rushed from work to make it to school events, the afternoons I spent teaching him to play ball, and the quiet evenings when I sat beside him as he did his homework. My voice cracked as I said, being a father isn't about being fearless. It's about being scared and showing up anyway. And I have shown up for my son every single day. The courtroom was silent. For the first time, I saw my wife lower her gaze, her expression unreadable. Maybe she remembered those moments too, the ones her lawyer was trying to erase. Maybe a part of her knew that no matter how broken we had become as a couple, I had never failed as a father. When I stepped down, I felt drained, as though I had poured every piece of myself into those words. The judge announced that the decision would be delivered after a short recess. I stepped outside, pacing the hallway, my mind racing with possibilities. My sister sat with my son a few feet away, and when he saw me, he smiled and waved. That small gesture, nearly brought me to my knees. I knelt in front of him, hugged him tightly, and whispered, "No matter what happens, I'll always be here." He didn't fully understand, but he hugged me back, and that was enough. When the recess ended, we returned to the courtroom. The air felt thick with anticipation. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. The judge cleared his throat and began reading the decision. His voice was steady, professional, but every word carried the weight of my world. He acknowledged both parents' importance in the child's life. He noted that my wife had indeed been a consistent and nurturing figure, but also recognized that I had demonstrated deep commitment, stability, and active involvement. Then came the moment that froze time for me. The judge ruled for joint custody. It wasn't full custody, but it wasn't a loss I had feared either. I would not be reduced to a visitor in my son's life. I would share in raising him, in guiding him, in being the father he deserved. Tears welled in my eyes, and I struggled to keep them from falling. Relief washed over me in waves, mixing with exhaustion and gratitude. My wife's expression shifted briefly, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face. But then she composed herself. Maybe she had wanted sole custody. Maybe she had believed this battle would erase me from our son's daily life. But the judge's ruling ensured that neither of us could replace the other. After the session ended, I stepped outside into the open air. The sunlight felt different, warmer, brighter, as though the world itself had lifted a weight off my shoulders. My son came running toward me, his little arms wrapping around my waist. I lifted him up, holding him close, and for the first time in weeks, I allowed myself to truly breathe. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Joint custody meant compromises, challenges, and learning to cooperate with the very person who had stood against me in court. But none of that mattered compared to the fact that I would be present in my son's life. I wouldn't miss his birthdays, his school achievements, his milestones. I wouldn't become a shadow. That night, as I tucked my son into bed at my place, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. He looked up at me with sleepy eyes and whispered, "Daddy, you're always here, right?" I kissed his forehead and whispered back, "Always." The fight had been long, painful, and filled with moments where I nearly lost hope. But in the end, love had spoken louder than lies, and I had kept my promise to never stop fighting for my son.